Going. Heck yeah, we're in. Alrighty. Welcome back to another Fossil Creek class. My name is Jackson, as you may know, and if you don't, hello. My name is Jackson. I am the retail manager here at Fossil Creek Nursery, and today is all about beating the heat. And in preparation for this class, I did have a popsicle, full disclosure, and it was delicious, as many of you should, which is the first thing I will say about beat the heat, is keep yourself cool. You cannot keep yourself cool and colder than the temperature it is outside. Don't want to desiccate and shrivel up like the plants that we're trying to save here for this class. So, beat the heat is important, and it's a very well-timed class. Here in July, it is going to be above 90 degrees. What you're trying to save, what you're trying to cool down, and the best way to go about it to eliminate any possibilities of stress, disease, or desiccation. So, if you've listened or watched any of my classes before, you know that I like to break things up into different categories. And I try to be as concise as possible, although I have difficulty doing that on occasion. So, to begin here, I want to first kind of talk about the things that are going to die the quickest. So if you are having this problem at this very moment, you can go and fix that issue or try and remedy it in some way. Those are going to be some of your more herbaceous plants. Now, in the heat here, it is brutal. If you're outside all day, you want to make sure that you have some kind of covering on, some kind of hat, some kind of sunscreen, anything to protect yourself, or else you're not going to be any good to your plants because you'll be burning up. Here in Colorado, as many of you may know, in the Front Range, it is flat, it is open, it is arid, it is windy, and it is extremely intense UV. So, it is important to know how to protect yourself first and foremost, because a lot of that translates over to your plants. Of course, water is going to be most important. If you drink enough water, stay hydrated, you yourself are able to better protect against sunburns and other things like that. Anyway, going back to some of those more herbaceous plants. So some of the most popular herbaceous plants right now are going to be our annual flowers and our vegetables. Now, annual flowers and vegetables, it is very important to make sure that you can beat the heat with these. You can get them to cool down, because if you don't, they will die very quickly. Now, many of you may have your annuals or vegetables either in a plastic, a metal, a ceramic pot, or you might have them in a raised garden bed. So let's start with some of those potted ones first. I have most of my annuals in plastic pots at my house, condo. That is precisely why I want to talk about them first, because these things will be the quickest to die if they're not attended to. Many people will plant their annuals in, again, terracotta like this. I'll start with those. A lot of terracotta or your glazed clay is going to be not necessarily extremely conductive, but it's a very porous material. That means that if you are trying to water or keep things cooled down in a terracotta, clay, glazed clay, you want to make sure that you're not only watering your plants regularly, but you're watering the container itself. Again, terracotta, like this, is very porous, meaning that they can dry out, and they can actually dry some of the soil out if the pot is not wet, and they'll it can actually pull moisture out of your soil. So if you do have annuals, vegetables, or plants, even house plants, in a terracotta pot in the heat, you want to make sure that that pot itself, that clay pot, the terracotta, is actually getting misted off. You don't need to soak the pot itself, but again, it'll help cool down the plant. On top of that, if you do have vegetables, or if you do have annual flowers in a pot that is clay or terracotta, you want to make sure you're watering it almost every single day, if not very regularly. That will depend on how many plants you have in that pot and how deep and wide the pot is itself. Now, many people have already planted their annuals, planted their vegetables, planted their seeds, and they did this more than likely end of April, sometimes not a great time, but a lot of your cool season stuff went in April. And a lot of people decided to wait until May. We had a late freeze this year, so it was important that you may have wanted to wait a couple more weeks before you planted your flowers and vegetables or warm season vegetables. But once that was done, in more than likely May, they spent the entirety of May and June rooting in there and getting established. Now, that's great because your plants are now going to be bigger, they're going to be fuller, going to have more foliage, but that also means they're going to need more water. Now that these plants are established in their pot, in their specific area, they are going to need more frequent water because they have more roots, and they're going to be transpiring more from the leaves because they have now much more to actually cool down and photosynthesize. So it is important to make sure that if you're going out there, before now, direction is also going to matter. East and north sides, or east and north facing sides, I should say, are generally going to be your more shady locations. These may not need water as much as annuals or flowers planted on a west or south side, but it is still important that you're either sticking a finger into the soil, lifting up the pot to see if it's light and needs to be watered, and making sure that they are not allowed to dry out. If they can dry out a little bit, that's fine. I may even suggest that, but not completely, especially not in the desiccating heat that we are having currently. Now again, those west and south facing potters and planters, you want to make sure that you're watering them, and you don't even have to water necessarily with the hose every time. You could use a drip, you could use a watering can, but watering and top watering with a hose is very important and can help to increase the humidity, which is going to be important for these plants, and also to wash off the leaves and cool the plant overall. In our greenhouse here, we are consistently wetting down the floor and spraying some of those plants. We're not keeping them wet or keeping stagnant water, latent water on them constantly, but we are spraying in there to help cool things down, which will be very important as the heat continues. So that is kind of your clay and terracotta different pots. A lot of people will use plastic pots as well. Now, plastic is a kind of easy, lightweight way of going about your plants. It may not be the most, going about your annuals or vegetables. It may not be the prettiest, especially if you're using companies that sell certain or grow certain varieties of plants, but it is feasible, and plastic is not very conductive, but if it is a certain color, it can how hot and how essentially how hot and really desiccating the soil and the roots can be. For example, if you do have a black nursery pot, which most nurseries will be selling those out right now, the plant could be well watered, the soil could be wet, and you're still having a plant kind of wilt or look bad because of heat stress. And that is because the black color of that pot is just taking in all that light, it's absorbing all that heat, and it is keeping it there. So even if a plant is well watered, it still might be heat stressed, especially if it's in a pot that is black or in a dark color, because it can be just storing and essentially absorbing all that heat. So just another important thing to know. On top of this, I mentioned that you more than likely planted your annuals in May or April or maybe even in June, and they're rooted now. If you planted something large like a tomato or a pepper that is going to consistently grow and get much bigger over time into a pot that is not necessarily bigger than maybe 10, 12 inches in diameter, then at this point it could be rooted all the way to the bottom. It could be root bound in that pot, and what that means is that you're going to have to water a lot, especially if it's a black pot, especially if it's a dark colored pot, because those things, again, will heat up very drastically. This is the same with anything that you put into a pot outside, whether it be an evergreen, whether it be a woody plant, a shrub, a tree, a perennial. All of those things are going to need more frequent water, and I would suggest spraying off the foliage as well as the pot to help cool things down. You could even spray the ground around the pot to increase that humidity and help everything cool down. Now, that's just a little bit about some containerized ways to beat the heat. There are multiple other ways that things are planted and that you can also help to do this. Again, starting off with this more herbaceous stuff, a lot of people plant their flowers or vegetables in garden beds. Now, if you did your garden beds well, you may have split them up from cool season vegetables like kale and lettuce and broccoli and uh, goodness, spinach would be another one too. Even some of the peas would be good, but and then your warm season, which is going to be your tomatoes, tomatillos, peppers, corn, things like that. If you split those up into multiple above ground beds, then that's fantastic. It's really going to help you out, and it's going to kind of stagger your yield as the season progresses, because cool season crops can be harvested both in spring and in fall as the temperatures start to cool down. A lot of times you may notice, especially if you have some cool season vegetables, that they're going to flower right now. Now, that's not necessarily a great thing for the life cycle. You can get more yield on them. There's a couple ways to prevent this. Of course, keeping your cool season vegetables cooler and well watered for longer is going to extend their time of harvest, but it is important to know that now the vegetables that we plant, they through and through are annuals. They're not, most of them won't come back every year, so you can't expect them to bounce back from the heat after they go to flower, because they are finishing off their life cycle. Now, you can nip back flower buds and keep the plant cool and protected. That will drastically extend your harvest season and your yield for some of these cool season vegetables, but those may be going to flower, and if they aren't going to flower, it is important, again, like with those containerized plants I was talking about, to water them very frequently. Spray off the foliage, which is going to clean them off. Again, it's going to cool them down. It's going to increase the humidity around the plant, which is really what these all need. Another way, and another very effective way to, let's say you can't water all the time, or it's in a very exposed space, what you can do is purchase something like a frost cloth or a shade cloth. Or you can take a light colored bed sheet even, or some type of towel that has been worn down over time, essentially some type of fabric structure that you can line up at the angle of where the sun is hitting your plant and prevent it from getting all of that intense heat and UV. This again will extend a lot of the life cycle of cool season vegetables, and will keep warm season vegetables a little bit, I would say, not necessarily wetter, but keep the soil more moist for a little bit longer and give them a little bit of protection. Now, a lot of those warm season vegetables aren't going to really care as much about the sun, because that is when they do most of their growing and producing, but it can also really just help overall, especially, again, here in the Front Range, we have intense UV, so a lot of times it may not be conducive to a happy plant. And so that is kind of the story with your raised garden beds. Your cool season vegetables, make sure they're staying wet, make sure they're staying humid and a little bit cooler, obviously, either by using a frost cloth or by locating them in a more protected or not necessarily intense spot. And then your warm season vegetables, like tomatoes, peppers, corn, I keep bringing those ones up, they are going to be important to keep watered as well. Tomatoes and peppers, they can root extremely fast when the heat and the sun starts to kick up and we have longer days. So once they are fully rooted, again, just like those containerized plants, they're going to need water much more frequently. So it is going to be important to not only water the foliage to cool them down, but to water more frequently to help them stay happy. Now, I keep mentioning this idea of watering more frequently, but I want to make it clear that I'm not saying you water everything every single day or multiple times a day if the soil is staying wet. It's a big one, if the soil is staying wet. If that soil is drying out, then yes, you will water according to that. And I would not set yourself on a specific schedule, because as the seasons change, so will the watering requirements and needs of all these plants. So again, most of the time it's a good idea to say water your vegetables and flowers every day. that only makes sense. They root fast, they're producing a lot of foliage, which is transpiring well. They more than likely came from a greenhouse that was in perfect condition. They've been out here in the heat. So yeah, you may need to water every single day for staying wet. Then you're only going to rot the roots and create an anaerobic environment for them. They won't have any air exchange, and then they'll die off. It is going to be difficult, especially if you're starting to really figure out what you're going to need to do, but my best advice would be to listen to the plant. If they start to look wilty, if the soil is looking dry on the top, stick a finger in. If it's still dry, give it a water. But listening to your plants is going to be the best way to go about this. House plants are going to be very similar nowadays. Again, it is getting hotter. If you have a plant room or a west, east, or south-facing window, those plants that are, again, reacting to the seasons, just like vegetables or flowers, they are going to need more water. Now is also a good time to repot your house plants, but they're very, I would say, very similar plants. So it is important to know all of those different things. I would now like to transition into more of our perennials and then our woody plants, trees, shrubs, vines, because it is going to be important to know what to do with those as well. If you are newly planting a perennial tree or shrub, now is a fine time to do those things. You can plant right now. What I tell people here at the nursery is that the water has to be good. And what I mean by that is similar to those annuals and how I would suggest to water them. You want to make sure that things are drying out a little bit, especially with your perennials and woody plants, trees, shrubs, but not completely. Now, you want to be able to keep water around, but you don't want that ground to be sopping wet or soggy. That, again, is going to create that anaerobic environment for the roots of the plant. So even though you have a newly planted tree, or shrub, or, again, perennial vine, you have a newly planted plant right there, you do not need to be watering it every single day, especially if it's in the ground, because our clay soils are so they have so much surface area, and the more surface area, the longer that water can stick in there. Clay does not like to be wet, but when it is wet, it does not want to let go of that moisture. So you want to make sure that you're not allowing things to dry out completely, but you're also not keeping them extremely wet. It may take a week, it may take 10 days for some of these newly planted things to begin to dry out, which is, again, a good time to plant or water. And then the same goes with watering techniques for those as well. You can spray down the foliage, you can spray the area around it to increase humidity to cool the plant down a bit. This is especially prevalent in some of our conifers and evergreens, which don't tend to have very many fungal diseases, especially stemming from the leaf itself or needle. So a lot of those are going to thank you for top water. A lot of people just want to throw on a drip and let it do its thing, and that's totally fine. But you do want to make sure that you're washing down the foliage every once in a while to, again, cool it and to allow it to really clean off the leaves themselves, because that will, again, increase the amount of photosynthesis taking place and get you a healthier, more vigorous plant. It's also important to spray off the foliage because if it's dirty, it may not be able to respire as well and, again, photosynthesize. So you got to cool those things down, and a lot of times it's going to be water. And when I say to spray down the foliage, I don't mean to do that and water it every single day. I do just mean sporadically every couple days. If the watering day isn't today, but it's really hot out, you can go out there and spray it down real quick. Mist it, again, increase humidity, cool down the plant. It's only going to help you for it. A lot of times, if you plant something in the heat like this, that is a stress response. It is taking a plant that has been in a container, getting a very specific amount of water on a very specific pattern, taking it out of that container or out of its ball and burlap. You're scratching up the roots, you're abrasing them, which is going to help them eventually, but it is a stressful experience. That's like moving across the country on a whim from a place that you've been getting consistent money and work and living arrangements, and on the way there you lose like half of your luggage. It's going to be a stressful experience, and it is for the plant to get moved from one place to another. So even if your leaves do drop, they turn fall color, that is a stress response. That is the tree saying, or the plant or the shrub, again, I'm just using broad terms here. That is the plant telling you, hey, I am now moving from a location that has been consistent to one that is very inconsistent. And what that means is I'm not going to be able to have the roots or the water capacity to cool all of these leaves efficiently and effectively. So I need to drop them, I need to set bud, and then focus on rooting a little bit and waiting for the cooler seasons to happen. Now, again, it doesn't mean your plant's dead. There's a couple ways to check that. If it's a perennial, you could check for basal growth right at the kind of the bottom where that foliage is coming out. If it's a tree or shrub, you can bend or scratch the stems. If the stems are pliable and not brittle, it means that you have an alive plant. It's doing very well. It's just stressed and is taking its time and conserving its energy. If you scratch the stem on something woody and you see green underneath, that means, again, it's not dead. It is conserving its energy and protecting itself from the intense heat as to better root and refoliate in a later time. Consistently well watered if you just let it dry out a little bit. Not too much, but just enough where you can stick your finger into the soil and see and feel that there is drought. Just up to that second knuckle. That's all I really need to do. If it is dry, give it a water, top water it. If it's not, then you can leave it alone for another couple days to maybe even a week. So, important to know. Now, I kind of talked a little bit about the herbaceous stuff and your flowers and vegetables in the beginning, talking about the different pots they can be planted in. Again, starting with the clay or terracotta, something very porous. You want to make sure that you're not only watering your plants, but watering the pot to keep it cooled down and wet. If it's glazed clay, you can water the area around it to increase humidity and cool it down. And if it's something in a plastic pot, then you also just want to, again, we might have to water more frequently. It's going to get hot for those roots. And you can also water the area around to increase humidity and cool the temperature down. Then I talked a little bit about houseplants just slightly. Those are going to need more water, and again, they'll react to the seasons very similarly. So I know we have all these great plants outside, but do not forget your houseplants. I am right now. They're dry at my house, and it makes me sad to think about. So don't forget those houseplants. They are going to be important to water and to keep cool, and you could do a lot of the same techniques here. If you water your houseplants generally with a watering can, throw it in the shower. Throw it in there, hose it off, clean your shower afterwards. That's what I do. Or you can make sure that it maybe has a saucer underneath with just a tad bit of water, not enough to keep those roots underwater, but in bed or kind of in-ground vegetables and annuals. Those in-ground vegetables and annuals are going to need water more consistently. However, if they ground, you're using something like a topsoil or you're using something clay, very textured, then you may not need to water those as much as something in an above ground pot. And then finally, we talked about all of our perennial stuff, our herbaceous perennials, trees, shrubs, vines, which you can cool down and hose down their foliage, the area around, and just make sure they're drying out just slightly in between those waterings. And if all else fails and you're not able to water as frequently as you'd like, or you're not able to provide the correct space, you can, again, purchase something like a frost cloth or a shade cloth, lean it up at an angle where the plant is getting and receiving that sunlight, and that will also help to diffuse a lot of the light too. So that's pretty much what I have for y'all. I hope everybody can stay cool and hydrated in this heat, and just make sure that your plants are also staying cool. If the soil's wet, don't water it again, but you can Hose down the foliage to keep it cool, and if it is dry, make sure it's not too dry, and give it consistent water. Deep but infrequent waterings is key. Does anybody have any questions before I shove off here? Give it just a second here. All right. Again, this has been Jackson at Fossil Creek Nursery. Hope all of you stay cool and beat the heat.